Do you like branding? Do you like social media? Do you like SEO, SEM? Look for the roles, look for the positions that offer you the opportunities to work on those types of projects.
What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another powerful episode of Marketing by Design. Today on the show, you and I are going to be learning from the one and only Whitney Smith-Pfefferle, Director of Product Marketing at Fiserv.
I'm in product marketing, as you know, so that's what I like about product marketing is I get to work on a little bit of everything. I get to work on branding projects with the branding team. I get to work on PR with my public relations team. I create content. I create campaigns. We track. We do analysis. Um, Go to trade shows. Work on events. Just a little bit of everything.
Whitney did not follow a perfectly clear or linear path, as many of us can relate to as marketers. She built her career by saying yes to new opportunities, learning as she went, and figuring out how to turn all that chaos that we deal with into clarity. But as you're going to learn, it wasn't always a clear path.
I just sort of ended up in my career and have taken some twists and turns here and there, which honestly, I feel like most of the CMO stories that I've ever heard kind of follow that same path, right? Where they had twists and turns or they had lateral moves.
Whitney has worked on teams large and small, and she's someone who truly embodies what it means to find your own way in a marketing career. I met Whitney at a Columbus AMA event a few months ago, and I could tell right away she was just a textbook high performer, someone I wanted to have a conversation with and learn from. And in this conversation, Whitney's going to teach you and I how to find your lane in marketing.
If you think you want to specialize in something specific, then I would recommend trying to look for those roles and those opportunities or even just those projects within your current role.
And the real way to measure success without falling for those vanity metrics.
And was it, like I said, was it this specific campaign that made them sign on the dotted line? Or was it this specific blog or this specific, what drove them into the funnel? What allowed sales to close that call?
If you're trying to build a career you actually enjoy and you just want some tactical direction from someone who's navigated their career, this one is going to hold a lot of value for you. You're listening to entry number 87 of the podcast. Thank you for tuning in this week. And without further ado, please welcome Whitney Smith-Pfefferle to the show. Let's dive on in.
You're fine. A typical Friday for me, I'm trying to catch up. I'm trying to get everything last minute done, as well as prep for the following week. So that hopefully entails fewer meetings. Thursdays are really meeting heavy for me. So trying to catch up on stuff that wasn't able to be gotten to on Thursdays. And just prepping and planning for the week ahead. Filling out weekly updates and making sure everybody has what they need. So that's a typical Friday for me. It's always chaos though. We have a lot of work going on in my current company and a couple of open roles on the team. So there's a capacity issue. And we're just trying to get as much done as we can all the time.
Yeah. I think we kind of touched base on this when we met in Hilliard, but like you said, you hit the nail on it. Everything looks different as you go. So you don't, and it's interesting because you try and do the best you can to create a life and a career where you picture your ideal day, you know what you're doing. And it's so hard to create that when you don't know what that looks like. Right. Especially when you're responsible for so many things. And even we just talked about how you get spread thin. And that's been my experience lately is I'm trying to do less things, but better, have focus on what the outcome of what you're doing is and not be so tied to sometimes the specific aspects of what you're doing. Because when you're jumping between projects, when you're managing a lot of things, it's easy to get lost in what the bigger picture is. So I think what I would really value your input on, and I think the audience would as well, is kind of how you can, given your career experience and how it's led you to where you are now, is there anything you would have been more intentional about in the beginning? Or is there anything that people can try and do to create the role that they want, given what's realistic? Because I think we all kind of hold it in our heads where it's there's this perfect job and I'm going to be living a dream life. When in reality, some of the most fulfilling roles it does feel messy and it is all out and about. But is there anything you think that like young marketers or even just ambitious people can do, whether they're freelancers or looking to get more into an agency route, where they can have a little bit more, they can be a little bit more in touch with creating like a lifestyle or a job, a career for themselves, where that kind of sets them on the best path?
That's a big question. Um, I would say yes. I would say they should take time and figure out what their favorite things to work on are. Right. Do you like branding? Do you like social media? Do you like SEO, SEM? And look for the roles, look for the positions that offer you the opportunities to work on those types of projects. Or vice versa, right? Are you interested in a particular industry? You want to specialize in financial services or restaurant,
Uh-huh.
quick service restaurants or something like that, right? So um, the earlier you can specialize, if that's where you think you want to go in your career, the better. If your plan is to climb the ladder, often the higher you get, the more specialized you need to be, right? You need to have years of experience within that specific industry or years of experience within that specific type of marketing. I'm in product marketing, as you know, so that's what I like about product marketing is I get to work on a little bit of everything.
Uh-huh.
I get to work on branding projects with the branding team. I get to work on PR with my public relations team. I create content. I create campaigns. We track. We do analysis. Um, Go to trade shows. Work on events.
Uh-huh.
Just a little bit of everything. So that's why I like product marketing because I get to work on all those things. But I work with those specialty teams, right? I work with my branding team on naming new products that come out, and they have years and years and years of branding experience, and I have, let's call it one, right?
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
um, uh, if you think you want to specialize in something specific, then I would recommend trying to look for those roles and those opportunities, or even just those projects within your current role that focus on those. Um, because it does become more difficult sometimes the higher you get or the longer you've been in a particular industry to
Uh-huh.
transition into a different one.
Uh-huh.
Um, Although I've jumped around in my career a bit here and there, so it's
Uh-huh.
not impossible. Um, and also, I would say that if you don't know, that's fine too, because I didn't know.
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
just sort of ended up in my career and have taken some twists and turns here and there, which honestly, I feel like most of the CMO stories that I've ever heard kind of follow that same
Yep.
path, right? Where
Yep.
they had twists and turns, or they had lateral moves, or they had step backs. So it's okay to not know, and it's okay to take those lateral steps or
Uh-huh.
um, take a project just because it's what you want to work on.
Yeah, that's so good to hear that. Because there's this element of always wanting to. You'll have the people that say you need to niche down early, you need to specialize on one thing, and this is just the lifelong struggle is that you want to follow your interests, but then like in the beginning you don't know what those are yet, right? So it looks like a lot of, I mean, we talked about this last time, like saying yes to everything and really trying to find what you want to hone more in on. So you're kind of like circling the plane around what you think is the end outcome. And I think it's very rare that you hear, whether it's in marketing or career in general, where you hear anyone that was like, "Yeah, I had it figured out from the beginning." And if they do, they knew like the whole time this was the one thing that I knew I always wanted to do, and I had no other kind of recourse, and they remain very focused. They're always pretty open to acknowledge that, like, I'm very lucky that I kind of knew what I wanted to do from the beginning. Um, and also just like removing the like we said, like the day to day, like the personality aspect of it, like saying, okay, it's okay that I don't have it figured out yet. Giving yourself some grace. This is a lot of what I've learned from like you and Delara and just like other people, that there's no blueprint for like the right way to build a marketing career, or the best you can do is try and be self-aware and just be conscious during the day. So something that I've started doing is, okay, taking a little bit before the end of the day and saying like, what were the tasks I did that I actually enjoyed? And one thing I want to do is like the 15-minute log, where you actually set a timer for every 15 minutes throughout the day. What client projects were you working on? What tasks were you doing? Were you spending your time like in the business or on the business, learning versus earning? and trying to create some awareness around that, because if you don't have awareness around what you want, then you can never kind of set the conditions for, making the outcome happen. Um, but something that I kind of want to do is to, like the Tim Ferriss technique of kind of zooming in, zooming out. So we've gotten a little bit tactical in terms of your day to day and your lifestyle. But what is like the bigger picture in the story? Like, how did you sort of circle in on product marketing being your thing to focus in on? And what was that sort of process of discovery like from you for you?
I fell into it accidentally.
Hmm. Nice,
I feel like
nice.
you probably hear quite a bit of that talking to everybody, but
Uh-huh.
uh, let's see, my career journey. I started as a marketing assistant for a small not-for-profit trade association. So there were literally two of us, doing all the marketing. Moved from there to where did I go from there? To a legal support services firm. Again, small team. I think there were three or four of us total, um, and kind of have almost bumped up to slightly bigger companies. With one startup thrown in the middle there. But
Uh-huh.
so let's see. From there, then I've just sort of progressed up. But I've always been on really small teams. And ended up at a financial services company for a very long time doing product marketing and jumped from there. Eventually landed at a startup, again, very small team, and then moved to another financial services company doing product marketing.
Uh-huh.
So probably the overarching theme of my experience is small teams or product marketing teams where you have to do a little bit of everything,
Uh-huh.
right? You do get to work on rebranding and a new logo and a new name and new colors. You do get to work on, trade shows and events and press releases and content and collateral. But sort of the theme for me has now primarily been B2B and primarily been financial services industry. Um, but again, I've jumped industries. I feel like that's a little bit more unique for me, having changed industries.
Uh-huh.
Um, a lot of times people will stay within one. My personal thought behind that is that you can learn the products, you can learn the industry, but being a good marketer is transferable skills, right?
Yeah.
Um, but if you had asked me when I was your age, what do you want to do? What kind of marketing do you want to specialize in?
So like 2 or 3 years ago, like last year, what if I were to ask you?
Yeah. Um, it probably might not have been B2B, but I sort of fell into that and have gotten really comfortable and really good at it. How to
Uh-huh.
target companies or, large or small. Um, and find it really interesting and fascinating. It's still similar to B2C in that there's still the emotional component to the purchase, right?
Yeah.
There's
Mhm.
still, what's in it for me, what's in it for my company, what's in it for my customers or my clients. And I really, really like it. Was
Yeah.
that a good answer?
Yeah, that's a good answer. Jeez. It's good to hear that, the skills are transferable. Because that is kind of like the age-old debate is, okay, and I think it's also what creates a lot of the sense of career anxiety. Like, am I doing the right thing? Where people get gun shy about like being scared that they're wasting their time doing the right thing if they're not enjoying it. And then the flip side of that is that they're scared to invest more into it. So you don't end up getting as most into this job role, this career, this application, um, that you could have been if you just kind of released the animosity around wondering it in the first place. So it's good to see that those lessons kind of shift and transition, but it does get hard, like you said, the longer you get in to make the transition from one to the other. So it's just good to have it on your radar ahead of time, but also not let it be a roadblock. Because you hear, and like full transparency, one of the biggest things I get to learn from all of the people that I look up to that I get to talk to is that it's not lost time if you're on the job, you're making connections, you're learning, and you're in the industry, like you're in the trenches. You just have to have that honest conversation with yourself of like, what actions can you take based on where you are? Because you can't act on information that you don't know yet. Um, And it's really good. It's really reassuring for people to hear that because especially when they're young, they don't know that. Um, if there's, did you ever have an internship or because you mentioned about working on smaller teams versus bigger teams? And I think that's a really sort of interesting part that stood out to me the last time we talked. Was there more of a transition phase? For me, it sounds like it would be. Was there more of a sort of a contrast from going to a bigger to a smaller team? Because I imagine that changes like the day to day, the communication a lot more than like changing from B2C to B2B. Was that sort of a more steep contrast for you changing from a smaller team to a bigger team? And how did that change kind of the day to day of your like working life in terms of like what you're doing throughout the day and tasks and stuff?
I think I think only from a process perspective, right? So big companies have more processes in place for tracking, or for working cross departmentally, with those other centers of excellence, marketing SMEs. Um, so that's probably the biggest difference to me
Mhm.
is the processes and how nimble a company is or is not. I'm not sure. I'm not sure there's a big difference between small team versus big team in the roles I have had, just because I've similarly like always had a lot of different competing priorities in my
Mhm.
roles
Yeah.
versus just specializing in one, let's say like one type of marketing. So I'm not sure that like a small team versus a large team has made a big impact from like my
Mhm.
responsibilities.
Yeah. I understand. Because I think you're also in different roles at the different sizes too. So by nature of that, it's a little bit of confirmation bias that you're doing different things too. What has
Depends on
been?
how many people you got reporting to you, Andy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're calling me out.
But
So
I
which
mean,
you should.
I've never been just a straight manager. I've always been what they like to call, player coach, or
Mhm.
I've always had projects or products that I'm still managing the marketing for
Yeah.
while managing direct reports. So um,
Mhm.
again, I think that comes down to a lot of the smaller team aspect as well. Trying to be lean and nimble, versus having, let's say 15 direct reports. If you have 15 direct reports, you can't also be doing a lot of the work yourself, right?
Right, right. I think one thing I wanted to get your feedback on, just kind of tailing off of that, came to my mind is, did you ever have a moment in your career, like with smaller teams, where you kind of had like a light bulb moment, like maybe a validation, like a successful win, like a really good meeting, like a really high point where you're like I'm doing the right thing, I'm adding value. 'Cause I think those are some of the moments, kind of like what we talked about in the beginning, where you can kind of reference and tie back to, like that's tangible. Like I want to try and create more of those. Um, but any come to mind in terms of wins, things that you got to share with other people, or just you felt generally fulfilled in your career? Any moments you can reference?
I think my favorite, I'll give you one that's personal, applicable to me. A couple jobs ago, I got so the right phrasing. A couple jobs ago, I was looked at as enough of an SME that the pricing team would just approve all of my estimates and analysis,
Uh-huh.
which was great. They're like, no,
Yeah,
Whitney knows what she's talking about. It was wonderful, except when I'm rolling out a $10 million product.
yeah, yeah,
So I'm like, guys, I appreciate that you trust my numbers, but can somebody please fact check this for me? Like, I really need somebody to double check my numbers.
yeah. Dude, it's like you beat
So
the game. I wouldn't. I would have just been like, "Oh, thanks, guys. How many of these can I get through?" But you're more mature than I am, so
so I mean that was really nice to hear, and get that kind of personal feedback. But
yeah.
probably my favorite experiences are when my direct reports have really succeeded in their roles. Um, I I really enjoy that, like watching them succeed, letting them get to work on the kinds of products or projects that they're most interested in. Um, and so I as a manager, I try to offer them those opportunities when I can within the system.
Uh-huh.
So if you have a boss like that, I would say take advantage of that, right? If they're saying, what do you like to work on? What are you interested in? I mean, there's always, limits to that, but if it is something that they can make happen, in my opinion, a good boss will.
Uh-huh.
So letting them grow and develop and take ownership of either a project or a product. um, those are the wins that I have seen, right? Getting a
Uh-huh.
campaign across the finish line or having successful ROI,
Uh-huh.
a webinar with good attendance and conversion rate, or
Uh-huh.
um, driving sales leads into the funnel,
Yeah.
things like that. And I have a handful of those that stick out in my mind.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but I
Yeah.
don't want to call anyone out who might listen to this later.
I mean, feel free to. I mean, this is your spotlight. So, um, yeah, drama gets clicks. But no, I was gonna say like you have the aspect of the big holistic ones, the career ones. Like, yes, I'm doing the right thing, and you also have the what I would argue is kind of makes the what makes a career fulfilling, like the small ones that you can stack. And I would encourage people to have some of those on your radar so you can always reference those as you go. So shorter term goals, more clear, defined outlines like success, failure, um, because we get so in the weeds with like trying to decide am I living up to the standards for myself, or am I being successful? And even when people validate you or you get positive feedback, or and I've even learned this too, is it looks like other people are crushing it sometimes. It's hard to acknowledge that for ourselves unless you can really live up to like predefined standards of like, okay, this is ROI. We're tracking the form submissions on a website, and this is how much their customer LTV is, how many clients that they booked from that conversion, and really tracking that starts through. Even through this whole conversation of imposter syndrome, it gets hard to deny that when you're very clear in terms of what the outcome was, and it's very black or white what success is. So that's the big takeaway that I learned when you just said that, is being able to kind of stack up the small wins, but also have the bigger picture things on your radar as well. So that helps a lot. Um,
Well, and having, like you said, having those specific statistics of things that have succeeded to add to your resume or your portfolio, right, are very important the longer you're in the industry.
uh-huh,
Um, it always cracks me up when you see somebody who said like, "Oh, I had a 200% increase in social media impressions." I'm like,
uh-huh.
"Well, that's because you had zero. So
Yeah,
anything is 100% more than that."
yeah,
Right. So, I mean, we can read between the lines too on those statistics. Just
yeah,
because it's a 3% increase, 3% can be huge in my industry. Right.
yeah,
So it doesn't need to be a 50% increase to make a big impact.
yeah. And what you'll see is that, and I think the people that like have the most successful careers, just objectively, and you can define what success means, but they want to open the loop and basically expose themselves to any sort of criticism, overcome any objections. I think this is a really big, like Whitney, a really big value of freelancing is that when the conversation is so tied directly to ROI, and you have to justify like, okay, this is how your investment in me as a partner, as a collaborator, as a business owner is paying off for yours. It really helps you in a good way be more self-critical about making your work bulletproof and holding up to scrutiny. And it's just our default to sort of skim over the things, especially in reporting and statistics, that make it seem less desirable. And I do this myself too. Like even in my case studies, I want to be very rigorous and think, okay, these are the stats objectively, like going into GA4 and looking at a campaign, this is the page traffic. But what does that actually mean? And like I kind of said, like taking that whole journey from start to finish and why it validates what it does. Because like I said, there are definitely times when I in the past have, and I see especially in a lot of young people who value maybe the more vanity metrics, they make that the star of the story rather than the substance and the value. So I think that's something we're all trying to improve on, and it's really helpful to have those call outs. That's a big value of these conversations as well. But kind of,
I mean, as a
go ahead.
as a whole, marketing hasn't always historically been the best at measuring those statistics, right?
Yeah.
So some old school people are trying to get into those measurements and those metrics. So it's always a balancing act, right? Like marketing is
Yeah.
a creative industry, right? We're writing content or we're creating, artwork or graphics or whatever. So how do you assign a number to that, right?
Uh-huh.
How do you measure impressions or measure click-throughs to, you know, attribute success to
Uh-huh.
that blog post, right?
Yeah.
Or that piece of content that you created. So there's often some infirm it, right? Like we did these 3 things for the campaign or these 10 things for the campaign, and it all drove this. But was it the one blog post or the one social media post or the one whatever that it probably was all of them, right? It was a
Yeah.
combination, but there's always some gray area in attributing those metrics,
Yeah.
in my opinion, often in marketing. Um, because it's this hybrid between creative and business.
Yeah. Like brand, it's like the whole brand versus performance. But yeah. So that is so good. How do you and this is a whole nother conversational rabbit hole in and of itself, but is the best way to sort of safeguard that the reading between the lines, the gray area? Because I even see it in like what we're doing now. Like sometimes it's not a direct, you can't, attribution is so hard when you're leveraging multiple channels and multiple assets. So if you could give like the most succinct definition that you can, because I know it's a whole conversation. Um, and I know I said I wouldn't put you on the spot, and I'm just like repeatedly breaking that promise. Um, but like if you could like try and summarily attribute like, okay, is it defining it beforehand, explaining it to the client, or explaining it in the brief of the campaign? Like the summative actions of all these different touch points are what's going to generate the end result. Or is it getting more specific and into the weeds with how each one or each platform, each piece of content is converting?
That's a good question. Um, in my world, I can often attribute it to product sales, right? So it's almost easier
Yeah.
in that sense, right?
Okay.
Everything that I work on for most of my career um, has been a specific product or obviously like group of products
Uh-huh.
and sales metrics, right? How many clients have purchased this? How many consumers have purchased this? What's our revenue number look like? Um, and so then you can backtrack into that.
Uh-huh.
So it's almost easier sometimes
Yeah.
than the gray area often comes in like, was it, like I said, was it this specific campaign that made them sign on the dotted line, or was
Uh-huh.
it this specific blog or this specific, what drove them into the funnel, what allowed sales to close that call. um and so it's to me the attribution usually gray area comes into that,
Uh-huh.
like, well, we spent x on paid media, was that worth it? Well, we made this much in revenue, or we drove this incremental sales, so
Uh-huh.
something worked, right? And
Right.
then which piece worked the best?
Uh-huh.
So there's testing and learning involved in a lot of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is not being so set on tying it to one specific piece of content or piece of outbound or post or blog post or whatever. It's more so about being able to tie it to the efforts of the campaign as a whole rather than one specific piece. Because I think there's a general understanding that it can be so messy when you go in and attribute things, but it's also how you optimize, you double down on what works. So I
Yep.
think there's just kind of an overarching principle that the more detailed you can be in terms of being able to identify it, it's going to be better. But you don't want to do that at the it's just like that fine line of you can get so in the weeds with trying to set up just like super in-depth and rigorous tracking where you can lose because we all have limited resources, you can lose how much you're allocating towards the actual production of making the content itself better. So it's all these things that you're trying to balance that really and being able to assess like what's the most relevant for the industry, what platforms are trying to show up on. So, yeah, that's really and even just the way you put that, it makes me opens my mind a little bit to thinking about it a lot more holistically rather than being so being so set on trying to pinpoint it to one specific action. And I think that's been a big value add of this for me. So thank you. But
Yeah.
kind
I mean, there's a lot
yeah,
of quotes out there, and I'm gonna mess it up, I'm sure, but about how many impressions one person needs before they remember the name of the
yeah,
brand
it's
or
like
they remember the product or
it's like 1911 7 or something like that. I've seen that. Yeah.
something like that. And I truly believe that that's at some level that's accurate, right? Like
Mhm.
especially in my line of work with financial services, these are big products. These are
Yeah.
large solutions, SaaS, um, back end services for where I'm currently at for banks and credit unions, right? These are expensive. The sales cycle is long,
Uh-huh.
right? You don't just call them up one day and they say, "Oh yeah, I need that." Like that you're competing against other people. Why are you better? How many times does the salesperson need to talk to them? How many times do they need a piece of marketing collateral or go to an event and see you there and say, "Oh yeah, you guys are doing really well in that space. I
Uh-huh.
should learn more about your product." Right? So it's almost never just one thing for us, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my sales team also likes to remind me that timing is very important too when they close a sale, right? Like 3 months ago, maybe they didn't need this, but now all of a sudden they're getting feedback. The client is getting feedback and they do need this product all of a sudden,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, all the
uh,
variables. Yeah, this has opened my mind to like different people that I want to talk to, like at all these different touch points. Like, do you have, how to communicate with sales, how to balance all the elements of the analytics and the tracking, and also
having good
like
sales partners is really important for marketing because we go hand in hand, but we have to know how to play well together in the sandbox, right?
right, because one has to communicate for the other and not misrepresent, and also I mean, this is what and I don't know, I'm not a salesman, but when you freelance, we're all salesmen on some front. Um, but they have to know the product that they're selling too. So making sure we're all doing our due diligence on knowing what value adds speak the most to the client. They know the persona, so being in communication so that they can make that puzzle piece fit and make the deal work. That would be a really good conversation to have too. Um, but yeah,
Now you're talking about a panel conversation though,
I
because if you're
know.
going to do that, you need product, right? You
Yeah,
need the product SMEs, you need marketing, you need sales, and then you maybe need a client too.
yeah. That's something we thought about. I think we talked about this in Hilliard was like having a having like a dialogue, so doing like a like different niche versus so like product versus sales, like and maybe stirring up a little bit of drama. It's like, oh, it pisses me off when you don't know the product or you can't advertise it well. It's really your fault. And just like opening the dialogue of what the nuances of the marketing industry or what makes one more effective. How can people work better together? I think that's a really big value add, and those conversations really excite me and light me up. So but yeah, we just opened a good can of worms there. But I first of all, kind of landing the plane, like I want to thank you just for coming on and sharing your wisdom, your expertise, and I want to apologize as well for not giving you everything. I think you still absolutely crushed it. Um, much more than I won't go there. There's I'm
And
so
then some
sorry.
others.
There's so many like small things I'll have to go out and like clip through this. I apologize, but no, I your time is like seriously value the heck out of your time. I think you crushed it. If anyone wants to continue the conversation, learn more about you, where can they go?
Probably the best place is my LinkedIn profile.